and welcome to the final in the webinar series of this Colourtrend summer series. Today we are talking everything natural light, about making colour and light work in your home. So if I just wanted to make the introductions to start with. So my name is Sheenagh Green. I'm a colour consultant here with Colourtrend, and we are delighted to have with us for this webinar Sharon Holland of Now and Then Home. Hi Sharon, thanks so much for joining us.
Not at all, Sheenagh. Delighted to be here. Thanks for asking me.
Sharon, would you just give everyone a little introduction about yourself, what it is you do, and how you came to set up Now and Then Home?
Yeah, well, I'm certainly not. You're the professional, Sheenagh, but we moved home 2 years ago, basically. We used to live next door to where we currently live. We swapped homes with my parents-in-law because I suppose they were doing a little bit of future proofing and thinking about what was realistic for them in the future years. We were living in a bungalow. They were living in this lovely Georgian farmhouse. And we were very lucky to be able to avail of that opportunity. So when we decided that we would go for it, we decided pretty quickly that we wanted to make the home feel, I suppose, just a little bit more us. And then COVID hit. So the planning for all of this started about 4 years ago. And then when we kind of ultimately started planning for the project, we were in the middle of a pandemic. There was no way to go shopping. There was no way to go kind of sourcing anything, researching anything. So I really had to lean very heavily on online. And I did an online interiors course.
Amazing.
Yeah, where the facilitator recommended Instagram and Pinterest as a means of just storyboarding what you like and getting a clearer sense of what your taste is. So from that perspective, then that's where the Instagram came from. I was on there for a few months, kind of hoovering up everybody else's ideas, and I suddenly thought, this is one-way traffic. I need to maybe contribute something that might help somebody else. And it's grown from there, and it's just a lovely community, I suppose, really.
And it just like came about quite organically as well. Like it was very much something that was practical for you at the time. And I think, like you were saying, not being able to see any pieces physically or like that, to be able to go to paint shops or anything like that to get a little bit of insight, to have that community. And I think we'll talk a little bit more later, the fact that you already knew the house a little bit when you kind of were taking it on. You knew how it had been used at the time, what the different rooms were being used for, and potentially the light in each of them then as well.
Definitely. It was a huge advantage, I think, knowing the house and knowing its previous functions, you know, having spent time in the house, having, I won't say lived in the house, but having certainly experienced the house at all times of year, times of day, times of night. I think maybe that could sometimes be a disadvantage because we can be attached to what we know about a house and how it's been used. But one of the things that I learned on the course was to try to kind of pull back, try to completely separate yourself from the current use of the space and just think of it as 4 walls that are facing north, south, east or west. And think about how could they be used.
Exactly. And that leads us with the north, south, east and west. That leads us nicely then into how we're going to talk today about colour and light, what the main kind of aspects are we're going to look at. So the first thing is to understand what the orientation is of the room and the light. So we're going to have a little introduction to that to start with, and then to look at how that orientation affects the mood and the functionality of the space as well, which I think will be really good for your insight in that, Sharon, because like that, how you've changed certain rooms around as well, that'll make such a difference to chat through that. And then choosing the right paint color for the purpose of your room as well. You know, is it a TV room? Is it somewhere you're only in the morning? And that will affect kind of, I suppose, what paint colors you choose for that as well. And then just to make the most of your room's orientation. So kind of they're the main things we're going to hit on. I'm sure we'll trail off every now and again into other little pockets, but they're the main things we'll look at. So I think if we just start with very basic to sort of say to everyone what orientation is, because we don't want to start kind of throwing that word around and not really kind of having defined what it is. So if we just very basically go through that, so you've got north, south, east and west. So it really comes down to which way each of your rooms are facing. So northern light, so if your room is facing to the north, generally that light is slightly darker, it's a little bit more like kind of grey, it can feel quite cold light. And then southern light is kind of the opposite. That's what people always really kind of dream towards, you know, places flooded with southern light. It's generally a warmer light as well. And then if you're looking at you're facing to the east, then that's where the sun rises, obviously. So that's going to have your morning light. And then the flip side of that is if you're looking to the west, your room's going to have the evening light. So it's really just to kind of take the aspects really of your house into account. And what we'll be talking about is very much kind of rule of thumb, but obviously it depends on certain other things, like, you know, if you have, you know, more windows, if you've got a massive tree outside a south facing room, these things can all impact on it. But would that be kind of how you would take the orientation of a house, sort of when you look at it, Sharon, as well? Is there anything you'd add to that?
Yeah, it's so funny listening to you speak about, you know, north, south, east, west, because my background is I'm a geography teacher. So it's like bringing me back into the geography classroom, talking about the points on the compass and the light and the sun rising and the sun setting and so on. So I think it's maybe it's that background that has made me very conscious of that when decorating or in any house that I've lived in, be it renting or owning. Definitely, we were very conscious of the light in our house. The room that I'm sitting in currently, I'm facing out north here at the moment. So there's a certain amount of light coming in. And before we came on live here, we were just discussing that it's a lovely sunny day. If anything, I'm actually trying to block out light here behind me a bit so that things aren't too glaring, but that's a good complaint. However, the structure of our house is such that it's over 200 years old, and it had been added to about 5 different times, you know, different ages and stages. And one of the things that was done because of the needs of the house when my husband's family purchased it in about 1905, I think, is that an extension was added to the southern gable. And that extension blocked up all of the natural light that used to come in on the end gable windows.
Wow.
And it added to the house a kitchen and a bedroom above. So it was very much kind of necessitated, because I'd say in generations previous to that, I would imagine some of the cooking was done maybe in some of the outhouses. There were probably people who, you know, were hired to provide the food, to bring it into the house. We don't live like that anymore. I mean, it's not Abbey, you know? So from that perspective, the additions to our house provoked challenges, because the kitchen as it existed when we moved into the house was quite small. It was very dark. It had one door with some western light coming in. And I think we all live in our kitchens much more these days, don't we?
Definitely.
Yeah. So one of the first things that we did was to really think about, where would we like our kitchen to be? We kind of suspended what we knew about the house. We thought about this room actually as being the kitchen at one point. We thought about the central room being the kitchen. And then eventually we came to the idea that no, actually that wouldn't really work because of the orientation, and decided to maximize bringing in some of that south facing light, southern gable light, by extending onto the southern gable.
Right. So you completely changed where the kitchen was situated then in the house, which I'm sure, having known the house, and even for, you know, your husband's family and that as well, that you're so used to having a room in a certain one, and then to be able to change it, I'm sure he now, after going through all that, can really see the benefit of it as well.
Totally. We went with a broken plan. So the picture that's there on the center of the screen that everybody can see is actually kind of shooting back towards the old kitchen through the gable wall, which was 4 feet thick. The builders had great fun breaking through that gable. So we added onto the southern end of the house. We retained the space that was the kitchen as our dining space. And because there was always, I suppose, a dining table at the center of the old kitchen, I think it helped to keep that sense of all of the lovely memories that were there for Jer's family.
Yeah, to not lose them either.
Yeah, exactly. So we were kind of cherishing the old part and cherishing what it was, whilst adding a bit more space to actually circulate and live in just maybe a slightly more modern way in our kitchens.
Definitely. And again, we'll go through it as we go on and kind of look at the case studies at each room. But that alone, you know, like you say about, look, you're spending so much time in your kitchen day to day, you know, whether it's for breakfast, then at lunchtime, then when the kids come home doing homework, you want that to have kind of the most light. You want it to be bright. It's not a room you're only using at the end of the day that you just want to be cozy in, you know. So like that, having the south facing light coming to it made sense, really.
Yeah.
Yeah. Perfect. So then on the flip side, the north facing, which is actually the room I think you're sitting in at the moment.
Yeah. Exactly.
So if we maybe talk through this, so again, just rule of thumb, north facing rooms are generally a bit darker, they're generally a bit colder, and the light is generally a little bit more grey. But saying that, you know, we were just saying there that I think you have a west facing window in that room as well, do you? So it doesn't all come down to just, you know, the orientation. You need to take that in and test the colours. And so maybe if you sort of talk us through, Sharon, if you don't mind, sort of the before and after and kind of how you approach this room, that would be brilliant.
Yeah. Of course. So the pictures obviously there are showing you the before and after. The room was in, you know, really good nick, actually, really good condition. And I suppose it was more in the taste of the previous generation, you know, nothing wrong with it, but it didn't kind of feel like a space that we would have put in place. This was also a room that we lived on site during the build and during the renovation. So this room is the room that we renovated first of all. And we kind of wanted it as a bit of a safe space in the midst of all of the dust and dirt and all of that. So we renovated this first of all. I was really conscious that I'm not very color confident. Like even sitting here in front of you, I'm wearing, like, stripes is very daring for me. There's a lot of black and navy in my wardrobe. So going back to our previous home, when we did a renovation after the small babies, our small babies had become little girls and had gotten past the point of coloring in walls, we did a bit of an upgrade in our paint, and I got some advice from an interior designer like yourself on color and how to maybe use color and be a little bit braver. Because I was, I suppose, afraid to be brave about it. But I think having gone through that experience, it really taught me that it's worth being a little bit more brave. And that gave me the confidence in turn to kind of think more about how we could use color in this house. I think one of the really interesting things in this room is that sometimes I would certainly associate blue with being a cold color. But I think this blue is one of the warmest colors in the house. There's just something about
so
the
interesting.
color.
And I think that's it, Sharon. Like, I think what you've touched on there is really important, because especially in a north facing room, anyone traditionally would just go, definitely don't put blue in a north facing room. It's just going to feel cold because it's already a cold room. But you forget these warm, like, even though blue is on the cooler end of the color spectrum, there are warmer blues and there's cooler blues. And if you go for a strong enough hue, like you have done here, that it has a good bit of punch, that gives the warmth. The more saturation, the more warmth you're going to get from a color, you know? So I think that if you had gone, obviously, say 2 shades lighter on that, it just wouldn't work because it would have felt cold.
Yeah, it's so true, actually. And I think simple things like the paneling, like that is very simple and very affordable MDF paneling. It's not original paneling. You can see in the photograph on the left that the archway is original. And we wanted to really kind of make a feature of that by adding the paneling. But just having that little bit of texture with the color, I think really works well. And then another simple trick that I learned from the interior designer the last time that we worked with her was to really emphasize the height of your ceilings. Dropping your white down off of the ceiling can be a great idea because it kind of frames the color and I suppose draws the eye upwards as well. We're lucky to have high ceilings in these rooms, so it's nice to make a feature of them.
Definitely. And I think that's a really good point as well, because although you have the high ceilings, not everyone does, you know, and you can still do that sort of mock pictorial effect by just dropping your white even a foot below the ceiling, and that'll lift everything. So if you are that little bit conscious that it's going to be overly dark, you know, if you just drop that slightly, it's just lifting the ceiling, like you say, and allowing a bit more light to bounce around.
Yeah, definitely. Our previous home was a 1970s bungalow, so much more boxy and square. And we did that, and it made an absolutely huge difference. We actually did it around some of the door frames as well. and it just created just a much nicer sight line in the rooms, having that broader white frame around the doors. So simple tips and tricks like that make all of the difference.
Definitely.
I think it's well worth getting advice.
Definitely. And with the ceiling paint then that you went with, is that a brilliant white, Sharon?
It's not. So we actually decided not to go with brilliant white in most of the spaces in our home. I think apart from the hallway. We went with Milk Teeth. It's a Colourtrend colour. It's just, again, there's a warmer hue, I think, in it. You'll be able to probably explain why or what the science is in terms of colours, but there's just a lovely, lovely warmth in the colour.
Yeah, it's one of my favourites, definitely, because it still feels like a really nice, crisp, white. It doesn't have any yellow to it. But it's so nice because it's a little bit softer than a brilliant white. So whether you're going for like a south facing room, which if it's a brilliant white, it can nearly feel a bit too bright, it's a bit blinding, you need sunglasses. And then if it's in a north facing room, it still has the warmth to it because there's a tiny bit of brown in it. So yeah, it's a really, really good colour to go with. And then the other thing on this room I was just going to say is about the texture. So you've added wallpaper as well, which is, again, that nice warm blue.
Yeah, definitely. I suppose it's not in the photograph, but I have prop here. So we just added like a traditional kind of Morris colour texture, but I think the colour works quite well off of the blue. And then again, not being somebody that's very colour confident, the way I don't like matchy decor. I like things that are a little bit eclectic and a little bit gathered. But I'm always a bit worried about what colours work and what colours don't work. I don't want it to look like an explosion in a paint factory.
Yeah.
So one trick that I've learned over time is try to find either a picture or a cushion or an item that has the main colour in the room and that you like the patterns in. I actually have an example here. So this is literally just a doorstop. It's not very glamorous, but it has very close to the blue in it. And it has all of these patterns and colours. And when I saw this, I realized actually this will give me a really good guide as to what I can incorporate into the room and what I can't. And
it's a really good starting point, isn't it, for people? You could do it with a rug or with artwork or whatever. It's just kind of how to kind of visualize the colors before you kind of start putting them in the room. That's just a few different orientation shots there as well, just so you can see. And you kept like all your woodwork white and the ceilings white, which I think is really good, especially when you're using the room during the day as well,
I think removing the kind of yellowy varnish from the floor was a big part of the success in this room as well. And then we kind of went with a light ash tone. I did it myself on the floor, and it was really easy to apply, and it just lifts the whole space. I think it makes it feel a bit more modern. Like it's still, of course, an old farmhouse. We're not trying to make it something that it isn't. But it just feels a little bit fresher and a little bit more contemporary, I think.
Definitely. And with the paint colour, and again, the other rooms, we can talk about that. When you kind of had looked at that paint colour and you're thinking, will I go for it? How did you go about testing it? Did you just go for it, or did you do a sample in the room, or?
Initially, I got, the little strip card with the multiple blues in the same section. And I brought it into the room and I was looking at it on the different walls to try to get a sense of it. To be honest, Sheenagh, I found that it was too small. So I went back to the store, I got a tester pot, and I literally just came into the room and put a good, like maybe a panel sized section of it onto the wall, onto both of the walls I was hoping to use it on, and then set up like a little sample of the wallpaper on the opposing walls. What was really good about that is you could actually step back from it and say, is this a colour that I'm going to be able to live with? So it helped me build a bit of confidence around it. And it also meant then that if I was putting that up in the morning, I could go back that night and have a look and go, well, okay, it looks quite different in the evening time. I like it in the morning, but I'm not quite sure in the evening. So I do think that's important. You have to be able to live with the colours that you use.
I think 100%. The little strips are really good as a starting point if you're trying to match the fabrics or anything like that. But I would always say, and anyone in any of our stores would say the same, make sure to test it, because honestly, how it looks in the shop compared to in your home, compared to room, it'll look completely different. So I would always say, get a paint sample or a larger colour card and to test it in the actual room. And to say as well that, you know, when you start putting it up on the wall, if your walls are white or a lighter color to start with, it can feel a bit scary because everything else around it is very light and it's the only dark thing. But once the color is up, you know, that's going to cocoon the room then. So I think you had said before about one of the colors you would use, Sharon, that it was like you just had to hold your nerve a bit.
Definitely. The color that we used in the den, which you'll see in a couple of slides time, it was a little bit of a heart attack color when it went up on the wall, first of all. And there was a real steady the nerves. Let's just keep going with this. And I suppose the other thing to say is that if you just put up one coat of it, excuse me, it's not going to look, so you're probably going to have to go back and put that second coat on as well.
Definitely.
To get a true sense of how it's going to actually appear.
Definitely. So that color there is Heavenly Sky 0618. And I think it's just so good for people to see that, obviously, again, testing your house, but I think to see someone who's done the color like that, you know, and how well it's worked in a north facing room, I would always say go pretty strong in a north facing room. Either go quite warm, you know, bring in kind of more clay tones, or to go quite strong with the hue, depending on the purpose of the room. So then we might just move on then, Sharon, to the room you talked about there earlier, just how you'd moved the kitchen to the southern end of the house, just to really get as much light as possible, because you were looking to use it kind of really breakfast to dinner time. So if you could just maybe chat us through, I suppose, mostly about really how you picked the paint color and your kitchen units as well, and sort of where you started with that, that would be brilliant.
Yeah, I suppose once we decided that we were going to extend onto the southern gable of the house, we at that point had, you know, contacted our builders. We had booked our kitchen maker here in East Cork, and I suppose we kind of went about it backwards in a way, because we worked with the builders and the kitchen maker at the same time. So in effect, the room was built around the kitchen rather than the kitchen having to fit in around the room. Now, I know that not everybody would be in that position, but if you are, I'd strongly recommend it, because you've great flexibility. Then you can actually save yourself a lot of money and hardship as well, then, in terms of the further trades like the plumbing and the electrics and all of that, you know,
in the long run. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, so we were very lucky in that regard. The two pictures that you can see here on the top, you can see the old kitchen, so it was quite limited on counter space. Table was at the center of it. The old range is there. The Waterford Stanley. I grew up with the Waterford Stanley in my grandparents' house as well. I think it's just like a hug in the kitchen.
Yeah.
And then again, the door on the old kitchen is west facing. So that was the only natural light source. And I think those photos demonstrate quite well that the room was painted in brilliant white, just to kind of try to flood a sense of brightness or light into quite a dark space. And then the image at the bottom there is one of the kitchen plans that was drawn up by our kitchen makers. So effectively what we did was, looking at the top left picture there, we blew through both sides, either side of the range.
Yeah.
We extended out beyond, and then we retained the range as kind of the pivot point as you move between one space and the other.
Lovely. That's brilliant. And I think what you mentioned there as well about the fact that this room had obviously just been painted brilliant white or an off-white to try and, you know, get as much brightness into it as possible. But a lot of people will do this, you know, in dark rooms or dark hallways, and it will just end up feeling grey, because white obviously needs light to make it white. And if it doesn't have it, it just looks grey. So I would really kind of encourage people, if you have a dark room or a north-facing room that is dark, to move away from just brilliant white, because it will just feel grey. And just on that, before we move into the next slide, I might just mention that if anyone does have any questions, just pop them in the Q&A, and we're going to have 15 minutes at the end just to go through any questions that you have about colours or specific questions for Sharon or myself. So we'll just go on then so this is the kitchen as is now, Sharon. So I think we can see there on the left-hand side the stove you were speaking about.
Yes, exactly. So the left-hand pictures there are the dining space. We've kind of just really centered the table in it. And it still feels like exactly the same space. It's sitting in there, you know, it feels like dinners when Jer's parents lived here. So I really like that, to be honest. And I think for us and for our family, it's important as well, because we're going to have lots of visits from all of his family. So having changed a lot of things in the house, including bringing our taste into the space, I really like that this room retained a sense of what it was and hopefully cherishes those memories that they have.
And a little bit of familiarity then as well in it, which is really nice. Yeah,
that's so definitely true. That's so true. On the right-hand side then is our actual new kitchen. So it's kind of built around 4 different zones. There's a cooking station. There's a large pantry bank of presses, which is the pink section of presses. There's a large island in the center then, with kind of breakfast seating on the back of it. And then there's banquette seating area on the far side of the kitchen, running along the windows, which are east, south, and west facing.
Wow, so you've got a lot of different orientations coming into that room. So is this room pretty much then morning to evening bright in general, apart from days like yesterday when it was...
Absolutely. Apart from days like yesterday when you're looking out the window wondering if there's any light out there at all. Yes, so we get the light. The sun is kind of moving around the house through the day, so we get lovely eastern light in the morning time, and the room is flooded with light in the middle of the day, particularly on a sunny summer's day. And then in the evening time you get that lovely kind of oblique light coming in at a side angle. So what's really interesting actually is that the room feels very different at different times of the day, and for that reason we decided to keep it, the wall color at least, and the ceiling color quite neutral. Like you can see there above the pink pantry that it's a vaulted space, and we decided to paint the ceiling the same color as the walls because we were confident there are actually 2 veluxes as well in the ceiling that you can't quite see in that image. So there was going to be no shortage of light. We didn't want to paint it white because of exactly what you had said there. I couldn't have articulated it as well. It's a layer of the white. But I just felt it would feel a little bit clinical. It's probably the most neutral space in our house, but yet that little pop of nice beigey, summer beige pink works really well.
And that's what you have on the kitchen unit. So your kitchen units are actually the colour in the right-hand corner of the screen you see there. And so to just kind of talk, I suppose, for people who might be undertaking a project this kind of scale of themselves, or even just one room, sort of what came first for you? Was it the wall colour or the unit colour? Or you know?
We actually had decided on our kitchen colours, would you believe, before we decided on the wall colours, which probably sounds a little bit peculiar. The cooking station, which you can see there on the right of the 3rd photograph, is quite a neutral, light, gentle grey. And there's a nice greeny warmth in it, but it doesn't read as green to the eyes, but there's a feel of green from it. So having chosen that then and really loved it when I saw it installed, we waited until the kitchen was installed before we decided on the wall colour. And that kind of allowed us to confidently make the decision to colour match to the colour of the kitchen itself. The colour so happened to be Sweet Ariel.
Lovely. And I think, you know, like you say, it's quite neutral and light, but you haven't gone for anything that's really, really, really light. That, you know, you have the warmth of the summer beige. I know in the image here on the right that it's a little bit lighter, but the summer beige isn't overly pink either. It's quite muted, you know. So in a south facing room, I'd say that just is gorgeous. And then the Sweet Ariel, I think it's really good because especially Southern light can be very warm. So if you go for something with too much of a yellow in it, it feels even more yellow. So the Sweet Ariel with that tiny bit of green, I'd say balances it out. So you still get that warmth without it feeling kind of too, I suppose, too warm with the glare of the sun.
Exactly. And I think even those 2 colours, the pink shade is quite creamy, if you like, whereas the Sweet Ariel colour is a bit more fresh on the walls, if that makes sense. So instead of it all being a little bit too pastel, there's a bit of a contrast in the colours.
Yeah, there's a nice balance. And I think as well what you were saying, Sharon, about waiting till your kitchen was in before you choose the paint color for the wall. Like, I really think, to take your time with things like that. I know there can be a lot of pressure in a build to get things chosen. I'm not taking away from that, but I think as much as you can, try not to be rushed, to
So
take
true.
your time with it.
Yeah,
Definitely,
so true.
definitely.
We actually had our, on that note, we actually had our pantry units painted on site for that reason. They were originally the same colour as the cooking station units.
Okay.
We had chosen the pink colour, but we waited to paint them on site just to make sure that we were happy with the colour rather than having them painted off site, installed, and then think, ugh, pink. No, it doesn't feel like I thought it would.
Nothing beats seeing it in the space it's going to be in. Like,
Yeah.
it really doesn't. Even to see your own belongings around the colours and things, I think makes a big difference. Oh, it's gorgeous, and I'm sure you're delighted with how it turned out.
We are, to be honest. There's like, it really functions very well as a space. And I think the circulation space and the planning that went into the layout of the kitchen in that regard is kind of key to that. But absolutely, the colours are just very livable no matter what time of the day you're in the kitchen. It's a very sociable kitchen, I suppose, and that's what we want. And
no matter what time of the year, I'd say as well, that it's as nice during the summer as in like a really dark afternoon in the summer.
Yeah.
So this is a west facing room. So just to recap for everyone, so this gets the evening light. So if you want to just chat us through sort of the before and after, the contrast is amazing.
Amazing. There's a big contrast there, all right, Sheenagh. This is a lovely room. It's a real cave of a room. It sits right at the center of our home. So the blue room is actually through the door that you can see there on the left-hand photograph more clearly. And our kitchen and dining space is at the other side. So it's right in the center of the house. It's probably the darkest room in our house in the sense that it has just one window which faces west. So again, it gets lovely light at maybe this time of the evening if the sun is shining. But apart from that, in the morning time, it's quite dark. In the middle of the day, it's quite dark. At nighttime, obviously, every room is dark. But rather than trying to make it into something that it wasn't, we decided to embrace the fact that it was quite dark and low toned at all stages. I think the photograph on the left hand side actually demonstrates it was painted it's actually a lovely mushroom color. But you can see the shadows, can't you, that are being cast on those walls there. Actually, I haven't noticed it until I was looking at the photo just now. Whereas we decided to go with a very warm, deep, kind of mustard tone, really, I suppose, with a lot of yellows through it, which is called Crazy Horse. And this is the one that nearly shattered my nerves when it went up on the walls initially, because it just didn't look great.
And I'd say, like I was saying, when you just have kind of, a foot by a foot up or whatever, and you just see this one patch and it's surrounded by white, but when you see it there, and again with the picture rail, just to the picture rail height and the lifted ceiling and the contrast with the sofa, it's gorgeous. And like, it's so warm, you would never get that warmth if you had gone too light. No, not at all. And actually, I think that little side lamp really demonstrates what happens to the colour at night when you put on ambient light. And I suppose that's actually something we didn't discuss, the difference between natural light and how colours look and your ambient light at night when you switch on the lights. Because I mean, in Ireland, a lot of the year we're switching on our lights, aren't we? So seeing that side lamp switched on, you can just see how the colour sings off of the wall. Exactly. And that's so important as well, that, you could be looking, like we're talking today about orientation, and you might be thinking, oh, I have a north facing room, what colour am I going to put in it? But you might never be in that room with natural light. The curtains might always be closed if it's the living room, and you're only there in the evening with the fire lit, and you've got really you've got yellow bulbs on the paint color. So again, what's the purpose of the room and when are you using it is really what you need to come back to, which you really leaned into. You kind of have this as nearly like a cinema room or for movie nights, I'm sure. Yeah, it is. It's kind of our winter room, really. It is the room where we have a fireplace in both of the living rooms, so we're lucky, but it is the one where we light the fire, we bed down, the movies go on, we have a projector that projects onto one of the walls. And actually
that's something a lot of people have asked me about the projector. Do you need to have a white frame painted on the wall? No. Most projectors these days will kind of color adjust depending on what they're projecting on too. So it works perfectly even on the very deep color. And I suppose the other thing is the ceiling in that room. We painted grey, so we stepped the white down, and then we stepped it in as well onto the ceiling and painted the main part of the ceiling grey, which is a lovely way of it kind of frames the chandelier in a quite a nice way, but it also just creates a bit of interest looking up. I've seen lots of interesting things being done with ceilings in terms of paint color and wallpaper and different things like that in the last few years. But paint is so much cheaper, isn't it, than doing any of those effects? So
it's so accessible, you know, that if you were to try and, you know, do that with coving, and, you know, like, I know you're lucky you have the high ceiling and coving, but for someone else to bring that in, it's a little bit more of a permanent fixture as well. But I think the grey has just really highlighted the white in that. The grey really brings out the lovely tone of the yellow, and it makes it a bit cozier instead of just going completely brilliant white as well.
Yeah, I think so. And actually that painting on the wall is another perfect example of what I was speaking about earlier. That painting we bought shortly after we got married years ago. But I just noticed maybe about a year after we'd been living in this room, I was like, oh, actually, that would work in the den. And when I brought it in, suddenly it was like a penny drop moment in terms of what colours would work with that mustard tone, you know?
To pull them all together.
Having something that brings colors together can be a great guide if you're not particularly confident, or if you're not an expert. I'm not an expert. You are, Sheenagh, you know.
But the thing is as well, I think, Sharon, is like, I think I said, we're like, you're an expert in what you've done in your home, and you know your home more than anyone. You know, you're there in the morning time, you're there in the evening time, you know where the light comes in, you know how you use it day to day. And I think, like you were saying, the more you use colour, the braver you get with it as well, isn't it? You know, definitely, that you can kind of push yourself a little bit more, definitely. And that's just a few more images there, and I can see like the cover you have in the ottoman there is pulling out the blue, and the blue I think just really complements the yellow so well, doesn't it? And like you say, it's nearly like a mustard. It's really, really rich.
Yeah, it's a really, really rich, deep color. And, you know, all of those pictures, I think, are showing it in natural light, which is great. But, oh, goodness, when you have the ambient light on at night, or even the fire lighting, it's just gorgeous. It's golden, really.
Yeah.
It's golden. Yeah.
Oh, it's gorgeous. Absolutely stunning. So we might kind of just chat through now, just sort of our top tips. And again, if anyone wants to pop any questions in, we'll be moving on to them in a few minutes. But we kind of just want to go through, I suppose, a bit more about what we've talked about, and just looking at the orientation again, any tips we have. So I think really what we've both covered a few times is making sure to look at the function of the room and what time of day it's going to be used. So is it a bedroom that, you know, you're only in there kind of in the morning and the evening, and that it's getting kind of that evening light? And with those sort of rooms, I nearly say to try and I suppose complement nature. So if you like, even kind of dusky pinks can be really, really nice in bedrooms as well, because they kind of bring that natural light in that you have in nature in the morning and the evening time as well. And I think, like you say, that middle room there that has the crazy horse, the fact that you're just using that in the evening time, you want it to be cozy. You're not looking for a load of light.
Yeah, exactly.
Definitely. And then I know you were saying that looking at getting colour cards and tester pots and putting them on your actual wall and seeing them at different times of the day as well. And I know you did this with the crazy horse one, Sharon, but did you just, I know you were saying you were quite nervous when it first went up, and had you seen a few pictures maybe yourself, like you said, on Instagram, and that kind of gave you the courage to go through with it?
I had. I'd seen a couple of similar tones used in darker living rooms, so that really helped to kind of push forward with it. But it really wasn't until whatever confidence I had about the colour, My husband Ger, when he saw it going up fully on the walls, he was really doubting, you know, what is going on in this room, you know. So it really took the whole thing being completed before it looked right, you know. And then even at that, I think, I don't know, is a room ever done? I kind of don't like the idea of a room ever being done, because I constantly seem to be kind of faffing and pottering around and switching and changing things.
And you do get bored of things no matter what. And I think that, as you said earlier, you know, your own personal style is quite eclectic, that it's not sort of, you know, it's a little bit, you know, patterns and color and not matchy. And I think that's what brings personality as well. And I think if you do everything kind of just have to get it done, you don't always absolutely love every piece. So I think it's important to sort of take your time and build it up, isn't it?
Yeah, it's very true. And I mean, there's nothing, like, our house has some old things, it has some new things, it has lots of pre-loved things, it has things that have come to us from, you know, friends, or things that have come to us from family members who said, I don't need this chest of drawers anymore, would you like to use it in your bedroom, you know? And I just think all of those little stories along the way kind of bring an energy to a home.
Definitely.
For me anyway, I know lots of people love a minimalist feel, you know.
And it comes down to your personality. And I think that, like that with say even the blue room there that you're sitting in, it's everything together. So I think if you look at a paint color in isolation and you're like, that's really dark or that's very strong, remember it's only going on the walls, you know, that you have everything else to bring together with that, like your window dressings, your wallpaper, all those, you know, personal items as well. And that all balances out.
It does. It's so true. Like, it's funny. It just struck me as you were saying that, Sheenagh, even in the space of time from when we started chatting, maybe about what, 30 minutes ago, something like that, to now, the color has completely changed with the light, hasn't it? Exactly. You know, and you can see the light of the lampshades beginning to rise a little bit behind me. So, you know, it really does change. And I think light is probably one of the things that I didn't consider early enough, you know, when I was kind of maybe decorating my first home or going at this the first time. But the more you think about it, the more logical it is.
Exactly.
Perfect sense.
This is it. And again, just with the color cards or tester pots or whatever it is, just make sure you test it in the space, because honestly, like, you know yourself, Sharon, you wouldn't believe the difference of even how a color looks indoors and outdoors. You know, even in the Irish light, it will look so much brighter outside. So just please test it in the actual room you're going to be using it in. See it at the different times of day. And the other thing with color is it very much plays off what it's beside. So if you think of, you know, a brilliant white, if that's right beside a white that has yellow in it, the white with the yellow in it's going to look very yellow. But if you take the brilliant white away, it's just going to look like a soft white. So kind of make sure you have everything in the room that you are going to have then, like have your color of your architrave or your sofa color with it as well, just so you can get that comparison. So then I think the next thing we were just going to chat about was to take into account the existing fittings, furnishing, and you know, any other, I suppose, pieces you might have, like headboards or sofas or anything like that when you're choosing a color. So that really comes back to don't look at the colors in isolation. Had you chosen any of your sofas or anything like that? You had your flooring obviously in when it was.
Our flooring, we did some adjusting to the color tones and things of the flooring. What I did actually was that, because I suppose we were moving house and the proportions of our living rooms were quite different, I actually decided quite early on that the sofas that we had in our previous home kind of weren't going to work and that I'd like a change. So I sold what we had, you know, on a secondhand website. And I actually bought the 2 sofas in this room new and the 2 leather sofas in the other room secondhand.
Okay.
So I just kind of did my research. And again, I know it's not for everybody, but there are huge savings to be made by going that pre-loved route, you know.
Definitely. They suit the house as well, that, you know, you're living in yourself. And had you those sofas when you started to pick the paint colours then, Sharon, or was it a bit of...
I had chosen the sofas for this room, so I knew that I wanted to kind of go with something quite grey, a little bit more muted than the walls were going to be. And again, I suppose sofas are something that, sofas in particular, are larger pieces of furniture. You often have to order them 3 or sometimes 6 months out, you know.
This is it,
So from that perspective, I think it can be very useful to make maybe the pieces of furniture that are going to be a bit more of an outlay, to consider them at the same time as maybe your color scheme or your big decisions in terms of how you want the overall room to feel. Because I imagine there's nothing more disappointing than spending an uncomfortable amount of money maybe on a piece of furniture and then have it arrive and go, uh-oh, not the right color or not texture or whatever it might be, you know.
Exactly. So it's just like that, to look at everything together. And I know it's not always possible, but as much as possible. Like even with the in your kitchen is a really good example. You know, the unit that first went in, you matched the wall color to that, you know, because you knew that was staying no matter what. And that's a really good thing to do. Or your flooring as well, like even kind of different oaks, you know, the different shades within them can be massive. So just to make sure to have a look at them. And then our last one, I think, is your own, Sharon. You're just saying, I know you had spoken that you had previously chatted to someone just about getting advice from them, and that it helped give you a little bit of confidence, even just to bounce ideas off someone, I'm sure.
Definitely. I suppose the first time that I engaged the help of an interior designer in terms of colour and how to use colour in the house, it was because I was really on the verge of just kind of painting the whole house white, because I didn't have the time, I didn't have the energy, I didn't know where to start. I didn't want to make a mistake that would mean that I'd have to buy more paint and repaint the whole thing again. So, you know, at that point in time, I felt that it was an investment that was worth making. But I didn't realize actually how much advice you can actually get in store from, for example, Colourtrend experts like yourself, how much advice is available online through Colourtrend or through, you know, various different companies, even from a furniture point of view and furnishings point of view.
And even in the stores, like you say, like most stores that you walk into now, like they're generally specialists, you know, like, I mean, any of the staff anyway in Colourtrend, you know, and there's a lot of them who have been there for years, like they know the colours inside out. And again, they'll definitely be telling you to test it, but they'll help you not just revert back to white, you know, because especially if you're doing up a whole house, you want to kind of love it afterwards. There might be the odd room that you're like, look, we'll leave off for a little while, but just to give you the confidence to get sort of what you're looking for. Because when you go halfway, like we were saying about that blue, it just completely dilutes it down. If you just don't commit to it, then it just ends up kind of feeling a bit wishy-washy.
Yeah, I agree. And actually, I thought something that you had said previously, Sheenagh, when we were chatting about this webinar, you mentioned that sometimes when we maybe pin images or create a scrapboard of images, you know, that some of those beautiful white light-filled spaces, some of those images are maybe coming from the Gold Coast in Australia or the East Coast in the United States. And light doesn't necessarily read the same way in Ireland. So that was something that I actually hadn't considered until you said it, but it really stayed with me after you said it.
Yeah, it is. It just comes back to just seeing it in your own home and, you know, getting a feel for what it's going to be like in that room and how you want to use that room. So we have just a few different finishes here. We've talked about previously. All of those colours are available in any of our finishes, and they're all going to be on the recording of this as well, so we can look back at it then. And I know, Sharon, that we're going to answer a few questions now as well, which would be great. So I'm going to just pop a few up and we can chat through them. So this is the first one here from Neve. So she says, my sitting room is north facing with a second west facing window. So that's exactly like your own at the moment that you're sitting in.
Yeah, exactly.
And she says that she wants to change the colour from a cream to a Colourtrend paint. And she says her curtains and her carpet are gold and they are staying. So what I would say is that you could definitely go neutral in this room because you've got your golden curtains. You could go for a really warm neutral, something like sultry stone, which would be really rich. I'd be interested to find out what the sofa is to see if there's enough of a contrast. But that, you know, would work well with the blue that you've gone for, or even a rich green as well, if you wanted to be a little bit braver than going for the neutral. Because gold in general does work well with most colours, to be honest with you. So it does. We'll just move on then to another question here. So from Katrina. So she just asked, her question is about treacle pudding, tobacco plant, and jodhpur. So she said this really actually relates back really a little bit to the crazy horse colour because they're all along the same families. So it says, I really want to avoid a strong yellow feel. Which of these should I avoid? Any advice would be good. And she just said, would any of them be too dark? So I would say that if she's looking for something that hasn't got too much yellow in it, I would probably go for the tobacco plant or the treacle pudding. Tobacco plant is gorgeous. It actually doesn't have too much yellow in it at all. It's quite soft. It has a little bit of green in it. And treacle pudding is like, I've used that many times in sitting rooms as well, and it suits most lights. So they would be a little bit more muted than the crazy horse, but either of them. I would probably stay away from jodhpur. It has a little bit more yellow in it, but again, just test them as much as possible. Yeah. So I'll just scroll down here, see what else questions we have. So this one here, it says that she has a west-facing hallway that's quite dark and it has a dado rail. And they are thinking of doing shell cove on the bottom and milk teeth on the top. Would these be too dark in a west-facing room and hallway? Again, the main thing really to do is to test with these. What I would say is that shell cove does have a little bit of grey in it. So it can feel a little bit grayer in certain lights, although it's not got too much blue in it. What I would say is to even try quite a muted pink, like something like Lowland is really nice for darker hallways because it just has a really small amount of pink in it. It can feel neutral at times, but it brings that warmth to it as well.
And Sheenagh, actually, our hallway is west facing as well. It's the space in between our two, the den and our living space here. And actually the upper part, we haven't got it pictured in the pictures here, but the upper section of the walls above the dado rail in our hallway actually are milk teeth, as are the woodwork. So if she wants to have a peep on my page, she'll see how the milk teeth reads in a west facing hallway.
That's a great idea. And again, all your woodwork and everything, Sharon, is milk teeth, isn't it, throughout your whole house? And the ceiling then as well in the room you're in at the moment is it? Mm-hmm. Yep. Brilliant. So see what other questions are here then for you. So it says, would interior matte oxvane be okay in a southeast facing room? And should I use eggshell? So oxvane would be really good in a south facing room, but it would also be good in a north facing room. And this is from Laura. So oxvane is a blue, and this actually really demonstrates what we were talking about earlier, Sharon. So oxvane is a blue, but it has a little bit of green in it. So it's a little bit warmer, and it would be lovely in a south facing or a north facing room. I would definitely recommend to test it. The other thing she does ask is, should I use eggshell? So eggshell is for woodwork. So that's, you know, your doors, your architraves, your skirting, front doors, anything like that. But for actual walls, it would be interior matte for them then. So we'll just try and take another question or two here if we can.
I found eggshell paint actually fantastic in our bathroom, I must admit. The finish is, it just gives that little bit more of a glossy finish without being too shiny. But I found it worked really, really well in our bathroom and the paneling we used in there.
definitely. And did you use eggshell in your kitchen as well?
Did we use eggshell in the kitchen? We didn't. No, we didn't. We used a satin finish, am I right in saying, on
Yeah.
the pantry, and then on the walls we used a matte finish.
Okay, perfect. And the matte again in the kitchen, the fact it's wipeable as well makes such a difference.
Oh, it's great. Yeah, it's really
Yeah.
great, particularly in the lighter colors. Even though, do you know what? With the darker colors, they're just as much inclined to kind of show the fingerprints and things, aren't they? Our island actually is black, and I think it's one thing that I would recommend. I see a lot of very dark kitchens these days, and I think you really have to know yourself. I originally was thinking of having our entire pantry bank in kind of a very dark grey. But I think, knowing myself, I would have constantly been wiping it and spraying it and cleaning it. So I think you kind of have to know yourself as well. Can you live with the finger marks and the grubbiness and the marks, which invariably show up a lot more on dark colours?
It's mad. And like you would expect, like, I talk to people all the time and they're like, oh, I don't want to go too light because it'll show up the dirt. But black or darker colors really show up the dirt more than anything. Even, dark doors, or like you said, they're about the island as well. They really do.
They do. Even dust.
Yeah, this is it. Or if there's any tiny little chip, it'll show it up as well.
True.
So I'm just going to take this question here. So it says, I want to get my kitchen units painted professionally. What is your best advice on how to approach it? What to avoid and the best plan for it? Do I paint the kitchen units and the walls the same color? So I think even your kitchen is a really good example of this. I know that you didn't respray the kitchen, but about painting the walls and the actual units the same color, this can work really well. Your eggshell or satin finish on the units are actually going to feel slightly different to the wall anyway, because of the slight difference in the sheen level. And you'll always have a break between the counter and the wall anyway. Are your units exactly the same, Sharon, in your kitchen, the green ones?
Are they exactly the same as?
So the wall and the actual kitchen unit?
They're exactly the same color. Like, we chose the color to match the units. But I suppose the units have more of a slight sheen off of them, whereas the matte on the wall kind of absorbs some of the light a bit better. We didn't want all of that south-facing light kind of bouncing back into our eyes. So I think that works really well. So they look slightly different, actually.
Exactly.
They are color matched. Yeah, I'd agree with you on that, Sheenagh. We also, in our previous home, actually, we had our kitchen units professionally painted. I'm quite happy to pick up a brush and paint a wall or a ceiling or whatever it might be, but I was really afraid to do it in on the kitchen units.
I know.
It was the cheapest, best fix for lifting the entire kitchen. It
completely transforms them, doesn't it? Yeah. And I feel as well, if the carcass is fine and everything in the kitchen and there's no need to completely replace it, spraying it and changing the hardware, like this lady says, is brilliant, and
brilliant.
There's a lot of different companies out there now. What I would generally ask is just to see some examples of their work, which is really good. And then if you do want to do it yourself, if it's been painted before, it doesn't need to be primed or anything. It just needs to be really well cleaned. And then it'll be eggshell, satin or gloss for your finish. And then if it hasn't been painted before, so if it's just raw timber or if it's a laminate or an MDF or something like that, it just has to be primed. So again, if you talk to any of the stockists, it'll be primer 1 or primer 2, depending on what the finish is for that. And again, it is very doable. It just takes time. You just have to have patience to do it with it. So I might try and fit in just one more question if we can. So it says, with eggshell on the paneling in your bathroom, how do you protect the paneling from mold and problems? So the main thing is eggshell is fully washable and everything. So as long as the paneling is sound before it's painted, it's primed properly, and you do your undercoat and 2 coats of eggshell, there shouldn't be any problem with mold. The main thing is just to make sure it's it's preparation is the key in painting, really. If there is any existing mold, that just needs to be completely removed before any other painting will start with it. So unfortunately, I think that's all the time we have for questions. I know there's still lots of questions coming in, but feel free to get in touch with Colourtrend on our socials. So it will be at Colourtrend Paints. And I know, Sharon, that you're happy to answer any questions as well. Just if you want to maybe just tell people what the best place to find you is as well, that would be great.
So the best place to find me is on my Instagram page. If you want to drop a DM, it's at Now and Then Home. It's up there on the page in front of you. And I suppose just to say thanks so much to Sheenagh for making the last hour pass like it totally
flew by. I know, we could do another hour with you, but Thanks again for joining us, Sharon. We really appreciate it, and looking forward to, I'm sure, like you say, your rooms are ever evolving, so we'll be keeping an eye.
Thanks.
Okay, thanks again. Bye. Thanks for everyone for joining.
Thanks for joining.
Bye.